Robservations with Meyer Burnett.
Guess who wrote in? You'll never guess. Oh, wait, you will. Miss Willow Yang. Willow Yang, she wrote in. And we love it when Willow writes in. For those of you who don't know, Willow Yang is a longtime cornerstone member of the PGS. She is also a real doctor of microbiology. Is that what your PhD is in, Willow? What is your PhD in? I'm not sure, but since she's been here, she has acquired her PhD, I believe, right? And she also writes great letters. So she's a doctor, and she's also going to be a writer. Perhaps she's going to be the new Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton was a doctor and a writer, too. I think Willow Yang is on that path. To read a Willow letter is to fall in love with Willow, because the way she puts words together, I just feel better when I read things that she's written. And here is a writer. Well, here's a writer that has been journeying through Star Trek. She started out watching the original series. She went through Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and she's been working her way through Deep Space Nine and now Voyager. And this letter is about one of my favorite Voyager episodes, so I can't wait to read it. So Willow Yang, you can see more of her work on the Burnettwork.net website, where you can also send me letters in addition to reading everyone else's. So take it away, Willow. Oh, hi, Rob. I am writing on another one of Joseph's Voyager recommendations, Blink of an Eye. Not to be confused, of course, with the original series Wink of an Eye, which had a somewhat similar premise, but a very different overall story. To give a recap, the episode starts with the crew of the Voyager investigating an interesting-looking planet, only to get caught and trapped in its magnetic field. Cue the Trek-nobabble. It's revealed that the planet is home to a race of humanoids, and that apparently time passes much faster on the planet, such as that 1 second on board the Voyager is equivalent to an entire day for the inhabitants below, which would make 24 hours roughly the equivalent to 240 years. As the Voyager crew struggles to find a way to break free, the alien civilization evolves, with much of its culture being influenced by the mysterious skyship that the people see up in the heavens. The aliens attempt to contact the Voyager several times throughout the different eras, and Voyager at one point sends the Doctor down onto the planet for what is supposed to be a few days, which, due to some technical issues, morphed into 3 whole years. Eventually, the aliens become technologically advanced enough to allow one of its astronauts, Gotana Retz, to board the Voyager and befriend the crew, and ultimately help the ship break free and go about its merry way. The end. I will begin with a few nitpicks. There are 2 main things about the entire setup of Blink of an Eye that bothered me somewhat. The first, as you might already be able to guess, is the fact that apparently almost all sentient extraterrestrial life, even in the Delta Quadrant, are apparently still humanoid. The Doctor, before being beamed down onto the planet, asked, what if they're big purple blobs of protoplasm? Well, considering that the aliens had already sent an audio message to the ship, it's probably pretty safe to assume that they do at least have lungs and vocal cords. But it would be pretty cool if they were indeed blobs of protoplasm, or anything else other than humans with some extra ridges. And as if this wasn't already enough, Blink of an Eye takes it a step further. Not only does this extraterrestrial race that's located tens of thousands of light years away from Earth look exactly like humans, but they also undergo almost the exact same cultural evolution as we did, or at least in the West. Transitioning from primitive pagans to the Renaissance era to the 20th century to warp technology. Sure, the original series made some reference to Hodgkin's law of parallel planet development in Bread and Circuses, trying to explain away why so many alien planets seem to evolve in the exact same manner as humans, but I personally think that's just lame and unimaginative. Related to this is my second issue, which is how the Voyagers just happened to come across the planet at precisely the moment when the evolution of human society, or humanoid society, was about to take off. If they'd gotten stranded a month earlier than they did, would they have just been observing a bunch of cavemen fashioning primitive tools and figuring out agriculture for tens of thousands of years? If they'd gotten stranded a few weeks later than they did, would they have encountered beings with technologies that have evolved far beyond the 24th century? The exactness of their timing seemed a little bit too convenient to me. A more minor detail that bothered me has to do with the Doctor's 3-year stay on the planet. I haven't watched many Voyager episodes, so I don't know what changes and upgrades have been made to the Doctor's program. Just how is a hologram able to reproduce with an alien that is all the way from the Delta Quadrant? And why is the Doctor perfectly happy about getting beamed back on board the ship, even though apparently he now has a wife or a girlfriend and a son? The only logical explanation is that he's a deadbeat dad who accidentally impregnated his roommate and is happy to be freed from the burden of having to pay child support. Nitpicks aside, I quite enjoyed Blink of an Eye and its examination of the evolution of human society and culture through the lens of an extraterrestrial race. There's a recurring theme throughout the Star Trek series of false deities and sometimes negative influence of religion. The original series had Who Mourns for Adonais, The Apple, The Paradise Syndrome, and the movie Star Trek The Final Frontier, which I still have not yet watched, all of which dealt with gods that turned out to be fraudulent. Similarly, the animated series had How Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth, where the crew comes upon an alien that was once worshipped by the ancient humans, Kukulkan, and had to accept now that his children had grown and no longer needed him. Finally, and perhaps most strikingly, is The Next Generation's Who Watches the Watchers. In that episode, Picard and his crew of the Enterprise journeyed to a planet that was inhabited by the Mintakans, a proto-Vulcan race that had reached a stage in their evolution where they've rejected religion and were starting to make strides in science and technology. However, an attempt to save the life of one of the Mintakans led to the latter discovering the Enterprise and mistaking Picard for one of the ancient gods. This causes the Mintakan society to rapidly regress as the people abandoned science and logic in favor of myths and superstitions and became willing to commit violence against others in order to appease their god. Gosh, that sounds strikingly familiar. Blink of an Eye takes a somewhat different approach compared to these aforementioned examples. While once again we see a race following yet another false deity, this time in the Voyager ship itself, their ideas and views evolved over the years. Whereas the initially primitive beings blindly worshipped the Voyager as a god, the people learned over time to question their beliefs and superstitions and were eventually able to deduce what the bright object in the sky actually was. Rather than holding society back, Voyager's presence in many ways had a positive influence on the race's progression as it inspired the people's imaginations and drove them to strive on and innovate. Although this does appear to take a somewhat dark turn near the end when the people started firing weapons at the ship. And this brings me to the debate that the crew had over whether to establish contact with the aliens after receiving a radio message from them. I happen to take Tom Paris' side of the argument. If I understand correctly, the entire point of the Prime Directive is to prevent Starfleet from interfering with the development of a more primitive race. The Voyager, just by its very presence in the planet's skies, has seismically and irrevocably reshaped the development of the culture. It's pretty ridiculous to me that the crew are already hand-wringing over the issue of making contact with the race when they've already, albeit unintentionally, influenced its evolution for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's a bit like Sisko anguishing over his role in the assassination of a Romulan senator in order to win the Dominion War when he previously ordered the use of weapons of mass destruction against non-combatants and civilians in order to win against the Maquis. You are never going to let that go. I love it. The Prime Directive has already been violated in the most fundamental way. It's pretty pointless to be concerned about violating it further. While I thought Blink of an Eye is solid throughout, easily the best part of the episode for me is the last quarter, when the Voyager crew finally does make contact with the aliens, or more accurately, Gotana Retz makes contact with the Voyager crew, since he was the one who boarded the ship. At least, the two different worlds have come together. Gotana Retz, very well played by Daniel Dae Kim, is easily the most fleshed out of all the characters in the story, and was able to evoke the emotion as he recounted to the crew of how their presence had inspired him throughout his life. The story concludes on a rather poignant note, with an elderly Gotana Retz back on the planet, gazing up at the night skies at the sky ship, the object that had shaped the evolution of his people, finally disappeared off into the distance. While he and the other denizens of the planet may be existing in an accelerated time frame, the reality is all our lives are really nothing more than the blink of an eye in the long history of the universe. We are all like Gotana Retz, gazing wistfully up into the heavens, longing to know what wonders may lie beyond. Live long and prosper, Willow. Listen, I love this episode. I love Blink of an Eye. It's one of my favorite Voyager episodes. It's actually one of my favorite Star Trek episodes, and I don't disagree with you. But remember, in Star Trek lore, there is a race called the Preservers that are first really mentioned in the Paradise Syndrome, the 3rd season of TOS, that are further alluded to in the 6th season TNG episode, The Chase, which seeded the galaxy with life forms in their own image, humanoid life. So the reason why there is so much humanoid life in the Milky Way galaxy is because the Preservers made it so. That's why there's so many humanoids. I know that's a convenient excuse, but that's the one that we have. But yeah, I mean, I think Blink of an Eye, I really love that episode a lot. I think it's great.